President.
The senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to talk for a few moments about a couple of subjects today.
It isn't a quorum call.
I ask that the quorum call be suspended,
Without
Mr. President.
objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to talk about just a few subjects briefly today in no particular order. I want to talk first about Russia and the war with Ukraine. Now, regardless of how you feel about the war in Ukraine, I think most fair-minded people can agree on two things. Number one, Vladimir Putin, who runs Russia, not the people of Russia, but their leadership, is a thug. He's a pirate. He has blood under his fingernails. He can't be trusted. And the second thing that I think most fair-minded Americans can agree on is that we would all like to see the war ended. President Trump has tried. And frankly, President Putin has treated our president, as I've said before on the Senate floor, Putin has treated our president like President Trump has taken the bullet train to Chump Town. He says all the right things when he talks to our president, and then he does the opposite. And I think he's disrespected America. He meaning President Putin. And I think he's disrespected President Trump. I think Ukraine is willing to negotiate a reasonable settlement. But it takes two to tango, and we're not going to have a settlement until President Putin decides it is in his best interest to stop the war. Not Russia's best interest, because I don't think he cares about his people. I think the war will stop when Putin thinks it's in his best interest. And I don't think he's going to think it's in his best interest until he feels the pressure, Mr. President. Because dealing with Putin is like dealing with most tyrants. It's like hand-feeding a shark. Okay? You can't reason with them. You have to make them feel the pain. A lot of people think of Russia and think of Putin as this gigantic country with a lot of wealth and power, and that's not really the case, Mr. President. Yes, they have nuclear weapons, but actually the Russian economy is pretty small. The Russian economy, for example, the European economy is about $50 trillion. That's their GDP. The Russian economy is only about $2 trillion. New York State in America has a bigger economy than Russia. And I think we need to keep that in mind. Russia's economy is also not terribly diversified. It's mostly oil. Putin relies on oil revenues for about a third of his budget. Now, why am I saying all this? Because the Russian economy is not in great shape, Mr. President. They're spending almost all of their money, about 7% of their GDP, to fuel their war machine. And the Russian economy wasn't that great, frankly, to begin with. And if you sit down and just look at the numbers and the statistics, you will see that the Russian economy, at one point, inflation was through the roof. At one point, I think they had 21% inflation. I think if you look at the Russian economy, you'll see that many of the commentators in Russia think that, and this is coming from the Russian commentators, not from others. They think that Russia might be on the verge of going into a recession. And if you look at the numbers coming out of Russia, you will see that manufacturing in Russia is declining, you will see a lot of the consumers, people, ordinary people in Russia, tightening their belts. Inflation, which I alluded to, Mr. President, remains high, and the Russian budget is strained. The price of oil is down. Remember, I said Putin depends on oil for about 30% to a third of his revenue, and the price of oil is down. Their growth model in Russia, their model of sustenance, is based on the war, and they're starting to feel the effects of that. For example, in the first quarter of this year, the Russian GDP grew 1.4%. You might be thinking, well, that's not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. The fourth quarter of 2024, though, if you look at the numbers, the Russian economy grew 4.5%. So clearly it's slowing. And once again, remember I said the Russian economy is based on oil. Why is it slowing? Well, number one, the price of oil is down. We know that. Number two, Russia is spending all of its money fighting the war with Ukraine, which has hurt other parts of its economy. The point I'm trying to make, Mr. President, when you're dealing with a tyrant like Putin and you're trying to bring him to the negotiating table, what you have to do is get him down and choke him. And the way to get President Putin down and choke him is through his cash flow. Putin, and remember, I'm not talking about the good people of Russia. I'm talking about their leadership. I'm talking about Vladimir Putin, the thug. Putin is only able to prosecute his war through cash flow generated by his sale of oil. That's the only way. Without that cash flow from oil, he can't continue. We need to cut off his money. We need to cut off his sale of oil. Now, we already have sanctions on Russia, and Europe has sanctions on Russia. But Russia has figured out how to evade those sanctions and continue to sell its oil. For example, India is buying a lot of Russia's oil. China is buying a lot of Russia's oil. But we can stop that. We have a bill, 87 of us have signed on, that would apply what's called secondary sanctions on Russia. And not only our bill would not only sanction Russia and its sale of oil, but it would sanction everybody who buys Russian oil. Big difference. Big difference. It would say to those who want to buy Russian oil, if you want to buy Russian oil, have at it. Knock yourself out. But you're not going to be able to do business with America. And you're not going to be able to use the American dollar, which is the world's currency, to do business in America. It will put Putin on his knees within 3 months. And he won't have any choice but to come to the bargaining table. Now, President Trump's been very patient. President Biden, he wasn't patient. He was giving. I remember when President Biden said to Putin, well, you know, we don't want you to go into Ukraine, but if it's just a little excursion, it might be okay. I remember that. What do you think Putin did? Remember, hand feeding a shark? He went right into Ukraine. President Trump, on the other hand, has really tried to be rational and negotiate with Putin and say, look, we need to have an amicable solution to satisfy both sides. Ukraine is willing. Putin has done nothing but embarrass our president and our country. The time has come to put Russia on its knees. And I hate to see it for the Russian people, but the time has come to put Putin on his knees. Get him down and choke him. And the only way you're going to do that is cut off his cash flow. And the only way you're going to cut off his cash flow is to cut off his oil sales, because that's at least a third and probably 40% of his money. We have no choice. Otherwise, this war could go on forever. Now, we have the bill locked, loaded, ready to go. We're waiting for the President Trump to give us the high sign, because we want to stay together. The president's the one trying to negotiate the peace. But I hope President Trump will seriously consider letting us pull the trigger, because it's the only thing that's going to get Vladimir Putin to the table. I wish the world weren't like that. There's just some people, I don't know why I make it to heaven, I'm going to ask, but there's some people in this world, they're not sick, they're not misunderstood, they're not mixed up. It's not really that their mom or daddy didn't love them enough. They're just bad people. They are. And some of them run countries, and one of them is Vladimir Putin. So let's go do what we have to do. Let me say another word quickly about the reconciliation bill. You're going to hear so much about this, Mr. President. I've already heard a lot that the reconciliation bill that Congress passed it's going to kill people. People are going to die. It's only going to help rich people. None of that's true. None of that's true. The bill that we just passed is primarily a tax cut. And taxes are not terribly complicated. When you tax something, you get less of it. Right? You want to stop people wearing wristwatches? I love wristwatches. I've had this one for like 30 years. But you want to stop people from buying wristwatches? Just pass a bill and says every time you buy a wristwatch, you have to pay a $200 tax. Boy, that's going to be the end of wristwatches. Business is the same way. You want businesses not to expand? Tax the hell out of them so they don't have any money to reinvest in their business. You want people to work less? Tax them. Take all their money. People are rational. They'll go, well, why do I want to work an extra 10 hours this week? They're taxing me. The government's going to take all of my money. So our bill was a tax cut bill. That's all it was. We passed a tax cut back in 2017, as you know, Mr. President. Those tax cuts would have expired at the end of this year. If we hadn't passed this bill, taxes on the American people would have gone up $4.3 trillion. Not billion, $4.3 trillion. It would have tanked our economy. Our economy would have gone down like a fat guy on a seesaw. And some of my friends say, oh, you cut taxes on the rich. That's not true. That's just a lie. I mean, well over half of the tax cuts that we extended go to ordinary Americans. Working people, working moms, working dads. So the first thing we did was extend the tax cuts. We avoided $4.3 trillion worth of taxes. And frankly, everybody who voted against our bill voted to raise taxes on the American people in the amount of $4.3 trillion. That's just a fact. Our bill did some other things, though. We added some new tax cuts. We cut taxes on tips. Now, not everybody who works for tips is going to get a tax cut, but most people are. We cut taxes on overtime. Most ordinary Americans work overtime. We cut their taxes on overtime. We cut taxes on Social Security income. We cut taxes on some car loans. We extended the child tax credit. $2,200 for every child. That's important for most Americans. We increased the standard deduction. We strengthened Medicaid. One of the things we did is this rhetoric. It's really a lie, but I'll call it rhetoric going around. Well, they're destroyed Medicaid. Medicaid's going to grow under our bill. It's just not going to grow as fast as it was. But 10 years from now, we'll be spending a minimum 20% more on Medicaid. Not less, more. You know the biggest change we made to Medicaid? Work requirement. Now, the American people are the most compassionate people in the world. If you're hungry, we'll feed you. If you're homeless, we'll house you. If you're too poor to be sick, we'll pay for your doctor. We're generous people. But those who can work should work. And we've got some people on Medicaid who are perfectly healthy. They're not disabled. They don't have young kids at home. I'm not talking about a mom with a sick child in her arms. They don't have minor children at home. They just don't want to work. They want to get Medicaid, but they don't want to work. Those who can't work should work. And all our bill does is say, look, you can still keep your Medicaid, but if you can work, not if you're disabled, not if you're elderly, not if you're in a nursing home, if you're a healthy adult at home playing video games, you got to go look for a job. And you got to work at least 20 hours a week. Not 40 hours a week, 20 hours a week. What's unreasonable about that? The other change, major change we made to Medicaid was some people, not most people, but some people when they sign up for Medicaid, they lie. They say, I'm only making $25,000 a year. Well, in fact, they might be making $75,000 or $100,000 a year. I'm not exaggerating. I've seen that happen. What we've told the states is twice a year for all of our folks on Medicaid, you got to check their eligibility. Make sure that they're not making more than they're supposed to, because Medicaid is not for everybody. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with saying to people, you're not entitled to Medicaid if you're not eligible? What's unreasonable about that? We're not killing people. We're trying to save Medicaid so that we can afford it for people who really need it. The other two things this bill did, and then I'll move on quickly to my other subject. It provided more money for border enforcement. Now, I know there are many people in America and there are many people in the Senate who believe in open borders. I respect that. They may not say it, but they do. They just think the border ought to be wide open, and they think that if you believe in secure borders, you're a racist. I don't agree with them, but this is America. They're entitled to their opinion. Most Americans don't think that. Most Americans want the border to be secure. They want to know who's coming in and out of their country. And this bill is going to provide the money to do that. The other part of our bill, as you know, Mr. President, provides much needed money for our military. Because we live in a dangerous world, and I wish we didn't, but we do. And weakness invites the wolves. Final thing I want to say, Mr. President, next week, President Trump's going to send us over what's called a rescission bill. What does that mean? Well, we've got a $7 trillion budget, okay? I don't know how much of that $7 trillion is waste, but every fair-minded person would have to agree that there's some money being spent in that $7 trillion that shouldn't be spent. It just shouldn't. It's wasted money. And so President Trump and this Congress made one of its objectives trying to reduce spending. Not spending that we need to reduce, but spending that needs to be reduced. I call it spending porn. And the president has sent us a bill. He's saying to Congress, I want you to reduce spending in the current budget by $9.1 billion. And let me tell you what the spending, what constitutes the spending I want to reduce. Well, first, $9.1 billion out of a $7 trillion budget, we're not talking about a lot of money here. We're talking about 0.1%. That's all. That's point one. Point two, you need to look at what the president's asking us to cut out. I'll just give you a couple of examples. I didn't make this up. The president is saying we're giving $3 million to Iraq to produce Sesame Street. Maybe we could use that money for something else. The president is saying we're giving $3 million to Zambia for circumcisions and vasectomies. The president's saying we don't need to do that. We've got other priorities. We're giving $500,000 to Rwanda to buy electric buses. The president is saying to us, Congress, we don't need to be spending the money on that. There are more important things. We're spending $67,000 to give insect powder to kids in Madagascar. I don't even know what insect powder is, but the president's asking us to cut it out. We're giving $3,600,000 to Haiti for pastry cooking classes, for cyber cafes, for dance focus groups, for male prostitutes. The president's saying, I don't think so. I don't think that the American people support giving their hard-earned money to male prostitutes in Haiti. So he's asking us to cut it out. He's asking us to reduce the budget by $833,000 because some of President Biden's bureaucrats gave a contract to transgender people, sex workers, and their clients in Nepal. The president's saying, I don't want to do that. And he's right. That's enough. You get the idea. That's why I call it spending porn. Triggers your gag reflex. You look at this stuff and you go, what in God's name? Who decided to do this? Well, Congress didn't. The bureaucrats did. It's money we appropriated, but we didn't tell them to go spend money, $833,000, and give to sex workers in Nepal. They just took the money we appropriated and used it for that. And so the president is asking us to do what's called a rescission, to cancel the spending. Now, I have listened, I've been here 8 years, Mr. President, and I've listened to a whole bunch of people talk about the need to reduce spending. But you got to watch what people do, not what they say. Because talk is cheap. And around here, I've learned pretty quickly that reducing spending, it's like going to heaven. I want to go to heaven. I bet you want to go to heaven, Mr. President. I bet our guests in the gallery want to go to heaven. But everybody wants to go to heaven. Raise your hand if you're ready to take the trip today. Most people, you are, sir, and I admire that, but most people want to live a little longer. And that's the way it is with reducing spending around here. I want to reduce spending. I support it, but not just yet, because I've got this project. Well, and I've listened to that. And I've especially listened to it for the past 100 days. Go get them, President Trump. Reduce that spending. We're behind you 1,000%. Well, he has. He has. 0.1% he's asking us to reduce. And I'm not saying senators shouldn't ask questions and make some changes if they need to be made, but here's the bottom line. It is gut check time. It is gut check time. You either believe in reducing spending or you don't. And if you talk the game and say, let's reduce spending, and you vote against this bill, in my opinion, you ought to hide your head in a bag. Because you will be able to cut the hypocrisy with a knife. It's real, real hard, Mr. President, to preach temperance from a bar stool. It's gut check time. We need to pass this bill. I yield the floor, Mr. President.
Senator from Washington State is recognized.
Mr. President, I rise to speak about President Trump's costly trade policies and the damage that it is causing American manufacturers, businesses, and family budget. Tariffs will cost an average household at least $2,300 in the year 2025. That's according to an analysis by Syracuse Post-Standard newspaper, and ground beef on chicken, chicken breast, butter, milk, and more products that are being made more expensive this year than last year. In fact, ground beef alone is 20% more expensive, an average $5.98 per pound. The Joint Economic Committee found that ground beef is at the highest price point since the data first became available in the 1980s. A recent survey of Association of Washington Businesses found that 48% of businesses in my state have experienced the impact from tariffs. Mr. President, I would like to enter this into the record.
Without objection.
Of those studies and analysis, 76% say tariffs have raised their cost, 45% have saying tariffs have disrupted their supply chain, 21% have had customers cancel orders. More than 1/3 of the companies already raised prices for customers. 15% are laying off people and making plans to do so more. So, Mr. President, I rise to say that this important information needs to be considered by my colleagues. We need to be more involved in this trade debate. American manufacturers are also seeing higher input prices driving up the cost of production. More than half of all goods imported into the United States are manufacturing inputs, and they have highly integrated supply chains that now are being made weaker. Tariffs are a tax on those products in your supply chain. Think about aluminum or steel or other components. A tax that economists will tell you is ultimately going to be borne by the consumers. Take one company, a Japanese-based parts manufacturer that filed for bankruptcy in June, Marelli. It was hit with an additional burden of 25% tariffs on the auto parts. Why should you care in the United States about this Japanese company? Because it is a major supplier of car interiors, lighting parts for various cars like Chrysler and Dodge and Jeep vehicles built in the United States of America. So automakers are on a roller coaster, and major car companies have reported the tariffs are expected to reduce their annual earnings, billions of dollars, and then what happens? Would you see the rise of cost domestically? Experts are predicting $3,000 per domestic vehicle and potentially $10,000 more for an imported vehicle. It's not just autos. Wall Street reported that John Deere is considering production changes and price increases for farm equipment because of an additional $500 million cost in tariffs. And according to the Copper Development Association, copper consumption for AI data centers is expected to jump to an outlandish demand, but building AI centers will cost more in the United States than any other country because of the Trump tariffs. So we know that we are building an AI infrastructure, but why are we making tariffs put that at risk? And just yesterday, the president threatened more tariffs on pharmaceutical products. So, Mr. President, it has been 170 days since President Trump took office promising to bring back U.S. manufacturing by imposing steep tariffs. And it has been 90 days since the president promised we would see 90 deals in 90 days. I'm not sure where those deals are. I'm not sure whose deals he's talking about, but I know this. We are now 90 days later, and it seems that we have had all the pain of higher prices. And it seems that we haven't seen any comprehensive trade deals. So we cannot have an endless summer of tariffs and price increases. We need, as a body here, to make sure that we are holding the president accountable on the trade turmoil that is hurting small businesses. Every day, families face higher grocery prices, trying to buy a new or used car or a new home. And yesterday, the president also sent a letter to 14 countries. Today, he sent 7 letters and basically threatening higher tariffs. In fact, one of those countries, South Korea, is a country that we've had a close partnership and ally with for decades. I visited them and our American troops in South Korea and have seen them guarding the demilitarized DMZ with North Korea. And most of the U.S. tariffs on South Korea were eliminated or significantly reduced under a trade agreement passed by this body, the U.S. Free Trade Agreement with South Korea. So the KORUS agreement was concluded in 2007 and ratified by the Senate in 2011. So why are we overturning with an ally that we work together to defend our interests in the region? Why are we tariffing them when we passed a free trade agreement here in the United States Senate? So I know the president thinks he is going to get comprehensive trade agreements. We haven't seen them, but we have seen the costs go up. It is time to say no more extensions. It's time for Congress to get involved in this issue. It is time for all of us to say the tariff chaos is hurting small business. That's the issue. According to the U.S. Chamber, 97% of U.S. importers are small businesses with fewer than 500 employees. They deserve to have this chaos stopped. I thank the President, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Secretary of Alabama from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. President, I rise today to talk about a number of topics. I first want to start with how thrilled I am that childcare was addressed in the bill that we passed last week. The affordability and accessibility has hung over so many Americans coast to coast that want or need the opportunity to re-engage in the workforce. And we took action to make a difference, to make it easier for parents to keep more of their hard-earned money, to be able to do just that. And it wouldn't have been possible, obviously, without that bill and the Republican conference coming together to actually deciding to affect change for hard-working families across this nation. We worked diligently, though, before that was even an option, building a coalition in a bipartisan way to address the affordability and accessibility of childcare. I want to take a minute to thank Senator Tim Kaine. The Britt Kaine proposal is what much of this was pulled from. We worked together to build that coalition, to make sure that we were getting it right for the American people. In that, we both had team members that worked diligently and around the clock. I want to thank Rebecca Howard from his team for the work that she put in. Tireless work. She happens to be an Alabamian from Alex City, Alabama, working hand in glove with Maggie McPherson from our team. Maggie dedicated so much time and energy to getting this right. And as a result of their hard work, along with Stephen Newton, Sean Ross, and Caroline Moore, Americans are going to have more opportunity. Parents are going to be able to rely on childcare and have it accessible to them. Businesses, large and small, are going to get to be a part of the solution. So I am so proud that the Republican conference came together and finally updated the tax code that had not been updated since 1986 and 2001 to double what parents get moving forward. But want to thank the team that worked so diligently for weeks and months leading up to that to make that happen. Mr. President, I also rise today to recognize and celebrate an Alabama native, Lulu and her incredible journey that led us here today. You see, just over a year ago, a year and a month, Lulu and her family did what many Alabamians and families across our nation do every summer. They took a trip to the beach. As a mom of two teenagers who is fortunate to live close to the Gulf of America, we've taken many beach trips ourselves. But what happened to Lulu last summer is not something I could have ever fathomed happening to one of my children. And it's not something I can fathom happening to anyone's child. Lulu was on a sandbar in Walton County, Florida, when she was viciously attacked by a shark. The attack was nearly fatal. She lost 2/3 of her blood in her body, and if it weren't for medical professionals who, by the grace of God, were close by, the end of this story could have been very different. This marked the beginning of a grueling journey, multiple surgeries and countless hours of physical therapy. Lulu lost her left arm and her right leg, but did not lose her will to fight, to be an inspiration, to be an example to all who knew her. She embodies grit and grace and perseverance and has been an absolute force to all who've had the opportunity to know her or get a window into her story. In fact, Lulu's actually taken up some new hobbies. She has mastered her golf swing. She is driving a car. She is shooting hoops on the basketball courts. She's surfing, now running. And if you go to her Instagram page, lulug.strong, which I encourage all of you to do, you will see her actually slalom skiing at Lake Martin. Like the power of resiliency, faith, and mental fortitude, Lulu's story is not only incredible, but has given us an opportunity to ensure that it doesn't happen to anyone ever again. And you know what? That's exactly what Lulu wants. She wanted to make sure very practical lessons of how we can work to avoid these attacks from happening in the future actually got put into law. Because you see, 90 minutes before Lulu was attacked, a woman from Virginia was attacked just a few miles down the beach. Elizabeth Foley of Virginia lost her hand while fighting off a shark. Again, this was less than 2 hours prior and just a few miles away. Had there been an alert system for sharks, Lulu likely would not have been in the water. That is the nexus of Lulu's law. The Senate has now unanimously passed Lulu's law, legislation I was proud to lead, and that Lulu has courageously advocated for over a year now. Lulu's law empowers authorized local, state, tribal, and federal government authorities to quickly deploy warnings via the wireless emergency alert system. This will happen if a shark has attacked someone. Preventing attacks like this is something we can all rally around in honor of Lulu and to protect future beachgoers and families. While the Senate passage of this law is certainly cause for celebration, our work is not done. I am hopeful that our House colleagues will quickly take up this piece of legislation and begin to move it through the House and ultimately to the President's desk. And I will tell you, God's hand is in all of this. Last night, I called Lulu's parents and talked to them about how incredible this is. And they immediately said that when they got the news, they were having their very first Lulu Foundation meeting. And the junior board was meeting, which are all of the young ladies that were in the water with Lulu when this happened. Their resiliency, their grit, their willingness to make things better for those that come after them should absolutely be commended. But none of this would have happened without a bipartisan approach. So I want to thank Majority Leader Thune. I want to thank Minority Leader Schumer. I want to thank Committee Chair Ted Cruz, Ranking Member Maria Cantwell, and I want to thank Brian Schatz. This is what the country sent us here to do, is to figure out where we have common ground and where we have that common ground to make the lives better of the people we serve. It's exactly what we did today. This wouldn't have happened without people coming together, and it is a big moment, not only for Lulu, but for the future safety of beachgoers from coast to coast. Mr. President, one more topic I would like to discuss today. I rise with a heavy heart in the aftermath of the flood that occurred in the heart of Texas Hill Country. Over 700 girls attended Camp Mystic this summer, excited about another year of making new friends and seeing old ones. They look forward to long days of swimming in the river, evenings of laughing with their friends over dinner, and furthering relationships, not only with each other, but with our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. As many parents know well, camp is a formative time in our children's lives. They learn independence while being away from their families, teamwork and sportsmanship as they compete in activities, and confidence and leadership as they look up to their counselors who guide them emotionally and spiritually. It's a special community to be a part of, and it's one that campers never leave. These 700 girls had just completed their first week in a month-long term before this tragedy. I am devastated for those precious young lives that were lost, and those that have been changed forever. For the parents, the grandparents, brothers, the sisters, the friends who face this unimaginable grief. One of those girls at Camp Mystic was 8-year-old Sarah Marsh from Mountain Brook, Alabama. Sarah would have been a 3rd grader in the fall at Cherokee Bend Elementary School. Her favorite color was blue. As a mother myself, reading the Marsh's family statement is heart-wrenching. Losing as a child is something no parent should ever have to endure. In that statement, her parents said in part, quote, "This tragedy that no parent can prepare for, and it will never be right this side of heaven." Sarah's grandmother described her as a beautiful, spunky ray of light in our lives. I join my colleagues, I join the people of Alabama, the people across this nation, in mourning today for the loss of her precious life and the lives of other fellow campers and counselors, and I take comfort in the fact that I know that she's with our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Scripture tells us, "For we know that if the tent that is our earthly home is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens." 2 Corinthians 5:1. As we mourn this tragedy, Sarah is a permanent and perfect home. She is there where there is no sorrow, no sickness, and where death cannot enter. My heart is also heavy when I consider more than 100 individuals that are still missing and the toll that this has taken on their families. The Santana family from Mobile was camping on the river for the 4th of July. Eddie and his wife Elena and their granddaughter, Mila Rose, are still missing. Tragically, Camille, wife to Eddie and mother to Mila Rose, was found yesterday and is now at peace with the Lord. I continue to pray for this family from Mobile, their loved ones who wait in hope, and those who continue to search and rescue in Texas. In fact, the devastating flash floods has triggered one of the largest search and rescue operations in Texas history. We have seen the better part of humanity through the more than 1,700 emergency responders and community and family members who are risking their own lives to evacuate campers and counselors and search for those who are missing. To the heroic first responders who continue to conduct search and rescue, your country offers you the deepest gratitude for your bravery. As a country, we must surround those who are grieving with love and support. I continue to pray for the victims' loved ones, the survivors, and those that are still missing. Mr. President, may their memories live on beyond just Camp Mystic and Kerr County community, but across our nation and our hearts forever. I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Illinois is recognized.
Mr. President, let me begin by joining the senator from Alabama and expressing my concern with her of what happened in Texas Hill Country, the flooding over the weekend. It was a sad chapter in our nation's history and a tragic chapter in the history of these families. Our hearts and prayers are with them. Mr. President, on a different topic, July 4th was the signing of the big, beautiful bill. That's what President Trump called it. Congressional Republicans celebrated. I did not. I oppose this legislation because what it did, I think, is going to hurt a lot of families. Taking health insurance away from 17 million Americans, taking food assistance away from millions as well, is no way for the United States to act when it comes to needy families. Have you ever been without health insurance? Ever been at a point where you went to a hospital and didn't have health insurance? I have. I was a law student here in Washington. My second year, God sent my wife and myself a beautiful little baby girl who had a serious health condition. I ended up at Children's Hospital in D.C. here in a waiting room, not knowing who was going to walk through that door, what doctor would come into that room and treat my child. I didn't have anything to say about it. I had no health insurance. I was at their mercy. Good people responded, but it's a time in my life I will never, ever forget. For the president to sign a bill on the 4th of July that takes health insurance away from 17 million people is just plain wrong. Obamacare, the medical program that was initiated under President Obama, extended health insurance coverage to more than 20 million new families, gave them peace of mind of knowing they were covered if something serious occurred, a cancer diagnosis, a serious trauma, they were covered. This president celebrates taking away health insurance from 17 million people. To cut Medicaid like that is to cause terrible personal consequences to a family. But it's more than that. Make no mistake, a family without health insurance in a desperate situation is going to do two things: postpone medical care that is needed because they can't afford it, or show up in an emergency situation at a hospital and beg for coverage and care. That's going to happen. So what happens to the hospital that provides that care? In most places in America, the hospital will do its best to help the family. But the net result is the hospital's not going to be paid because there's no health insurance plan. And if they're not paid, what do they do with the expenses of that treated patient? They pass them along to other families. So this big, beautiful bill that the president signed takes health insurance away from 17 million families under Medicaid and raises the cost of health care for the rest of us. How can that be a good idea? And why would we do such a thing? Well, the reasoning was very simple and direct. The president wanted to renew tax cuts for the wealthiest people in America. The wealthiest people. Oh, Durbin, you're making that up. You're a Democrat. You're just going to say that no matter if it's true or not. Here's what it boils down to. Elon Musk got a $346,000 tax break by President Trump signing this bill into law. Do you think he noticed? A man who's a multi-billionaire? Probably didn't. Didn't change his life one bit. But the family without health insurance, you changed their life a lot. This time, President Trump has come back with a new idea that I want to discuss here today. The president has come to Congress' doorstep with a bill called a rescission bill. One of my colleagues at lunch said, we need a new word. I know what rescission is. He knows what rescission is, but the American people may not. It sounds like a foreign word, he said. It does in a way, but it's a legal term. And it's a request to cut funding already appropriated. So money appropriated by Congress, signed by a president, sent to the administration, they decide they're not going to spend, they're going to rescind it, a rescission bill. So here comes President Trump's first rescission bill in his second term. And what does he come up with? This request would cut $1.1 billion from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Do you listen to public radio, public TV? Are you aware of what it does for your community? This would eliminate any federal assistance for a Corporation for Public Broadcasting. It includes $700 million that's eliminated to provide critical funding for local public media. This would devastate more than 1,500 public radio and TV stations across this country. Bottom line, do you think we're better off with less information as Americans or more? Bottom line, do you want a choice to pick your own source of information? Do you want that choice to include Corporation for Public Broadcasting? The president says, no, we're not going to provide the assistance for that to continue. What it means is for small towns in downstate Illinois, all the way up to Chicago, and the classrooms there, public media stations provide essential, nonpartisan news coverage, life-saving emergency and weather alerts, and educational program for our kids. I don't know the circumstances in Texas for this terrible flooding, and I don't want to presume anything. But as a general rule, more emergency information available to American families is better than worse. President Trump wants to eliminate this source, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And that means in many communities in my state of Illinois and around the country, the radio will be silent when it might be giving a warning that extreme weather is on the way. For most rural communities, this local broadcasting is especially crucial. Rural public broadcasting stations are often the only source of local news, the only source of emergency alerts in the region. These local stations also are truly independent. They reflect the needs of their community and the people that they serve. They go out of their way to be nonpartisan. I know because I've dealt with them for decades. For example, let me tell you one station, WTVP, local PBS affiliate serving Central Illinois. They have a program called A Shot of Ag, which shares stories and perspectives on farming, farm life, and the rural-urban divide in my state. I am proud to be a downstater. I'm proud as well to represent the city of Chicago. Why would I want to cut off information for the downstate farming community that is available through public broadcasting? Right now, in my home state of Illinois, there are 5 counties out of the 102 counties that are news deserts. 40 other counties have 1 news source left for broadcast. This rescissions package would eliminate $700 million in support of local radio and TV stations, forcing many of these rural stations with small donor bases to close, turn them off, be unavailable to the people who live in the community. In these remote Illinois counties, these stations deliver critical services that commercial broadcasters have abandoned in less profitable markets. What does it mean? Once these stations are gone, they're gone. It changes the culture, the information, the future. And in times of crisis, that could mean in the extreme the difference between life and death. Let me explain. Radio stations in Alaska rely on Corporation for Public Broadcasting to fund 98% of their operations. They will lose the ability to share information about terrible weather conditions that are threatening the people of Alaska. In Alabama, a senator was just here from Alabama, folks will go without emergency alerts during tornado scares. And just this last weekend, as I mentioned, a deadly flash flood took the lives of over 100 people and counting, sadly, in rural central Texas. While we don't know exactly what procedures were in place, we do know that this funding is vital for emergency alerts, especially when disasters happen in the middle of the night. These are critical services, but President Trump doesn't agree. In his request to Congress, he justified cutting Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and here's what he said. Federal spending on Corporation for Public Broadcasting subsidizes a public media system that is politically biased and is an unnecessary expense to the taxpayer. If your family is warned of an extreme weather condition on the way and you find a safe place, it is necessary, it is essential as part of your responsibility to your family to protect this source of information. These public funded local stations educate our kids, deliver emergency alerts, and inform our democracy. They're not an unnecessary expense by any measure. They're a lifeline. I'd like to share a story about the NPR affiliate WGLT, a public radio station owned by the Illinois State University serving Normal, Illinois. WGLT hosts candidate events and forums ahead of each election. Their mission is to keep neighbors connected and talking to each other. Its goal is to keep polarization out of local government, and it does just that. WGLT had 100% bipartisan participation from candidates in McLean County municipal election event. And McLean County municipal voter turnout has increased in local elections thanks to this public broadcasting station. For the president to say they're politically biased is just plain false. Another station, WQPT, Quad Cities in Illinois, only locally owned PBS station, serving Iowa and eastern and western Illinois. It is more than just a TV station. WQPT's First Book Club outreach program provides 5 free books every year to at-risk kids by partnering with Title I classrooms. They ensure the kids whose families can't afford to buy books or might otherwise not have access are given the opportunity to read and learn just like every other kid. Since the start of the program, WQPT has given away 400,000 free books to kids from low-income, English as second language, rural and special needs families. That is what Donald Trump calls a, quote, unnecessary expense to a taxpayer. It could be life-changing for that kid. While Donald Trump says this rescission request is in the spirit of improving government efficiency, I ask, is there anything efficient about denying information to American citizens, about not giving American citizens a choice when it comes to broadcasting? I'll tell you what this request really is. It's an attack on rural America, just like the big, beautiful bill. Because let's not forget, thanks to the big, beautiful bill the president just signed into law, 300 rural hospitals could close around this country, closing their doors and critical services they offer. With this rescission request, small towns and rural communities are going to get hit again and set to lose their only access to trusted local media in many instances. These cuts could irreparably harm communities across America who count on public media for 24/7 news, music, education program, and emergency alert services. I urge my Republican colleagues, privately they tell me they don't want to see Corporation for Public Broadcasting go away. The question is, will they step up next week and vote that way? Many of them represent rural areas, small town America. To stand up for these people and vote down this request to cut funding that has long enjoyed bipartisan support. I believe that there will be bipartisan support for this. I urge my colleagues to come to the floor today to speak on the subject, and I'm now going to yield the floor to one of my colleagues. I believe Senator Wyden of Oregon is next. Senator Wyden, take it away.
Mr. President, before he leaves the floor, let me just thank Senator Durbin for his leadership on this and so many issues exactly like this. What Senator Durbin's career has always been about is making sure that communities are stronger, more inclusive, and give everybody a shot at getting ahead. And I just want to thank him for doing this and all the times over the years that we've had a chance to work together. Now, as Senator Durbin has indicated a few days ago, Republicans rammed their budget bill through the Senate. In the coming weeks, they'll force a vote on yet another dangerous piece of legislation. Any day now, the Senate's going to vote on a bill that will let Republicans revoke previously approved federal funding for key services and key programs that our people rely on. All so they can follow through on Donald Trump's illegal and disastrous funding freeze he tried to implement earlier. Under their bill, Republicans want to gut over 70% of funding for public broadcasting. Now, when you hear the words public broadcasting, a lot of people, of course, think about the beloved characters Elmo and Big Bird, who are wonderful. I remember that with our kids. And at the same time, public broadcasting is a lot more than that. Over the last several years, local newspapers and radio broadcasters have been sidelined in many parts of the country. They just don't have the funds to keep their doors open. Many are getting bought up by private equity funds and corporate media conglomerates that sanitize and repackage local reporting to fit their own media narrative. Oftentimes, these new owners close the doors of local papers altogether. This is especially true, as Senator Durbin eloquently mentioned, the challenge in rural areas. Their broadband access is often unreliable and often too expensive to get out far into these communities. Meanwhile, news is increasingly driven by the interests of big cities, sitting behind paywalls or requiring high-speed broadband to access it. Now, this issue is a personal one for me. I'm a journalist kid. I grew up with a front row seat seeing the importance of protecting reporters and the vital work they do. That work is central to our democracy. And my home state hasn't been immune to the changes in the media landscape. More and more Oregonians turn to public TV and radio programs like Oregon Public Broadcasting for news and information. And in some of my state's most rural areas, like, say, halfway in eastern Oregon, Oregon Public Broadcasting is the only broadcast station residents can access. These programs are literally a lifeline for Oregonians during a time when local journalism is dying off. Not only do these programs provide news that's trustworthy, they also serve as linchpins in state and local emergency alert programs. Oregon Public Broadcasting is a state primary station for our state's emergency alert system. The broadcasters work closely with Oregon's Office of Emergency Management and other first responders to monitor and alert residents about statewide, regional, or national emergencies. In 2024 alone, Oregon Public Broadcasting helped notify Oregonians about child abductions, severe storms, and flash floods. Unfortunately, just this past weekend, we saw the devastating impact of underfunded emergency alert systems with the deadly flash flooding in Texas. As more details emerge, there's one area that seems to be clear. More could and should have been done to bolster the local emergency alert system to help avoid and limit the horrendous tragedies that we have watched nightly for the last few days. As extreme deadly weather events like this become more and more common, local, state, and federal governments need to be investing, not shrinking, systems like public TV and radio. These programs play such an important role in emergency situations, helping to get the most up-to-date information to their viewers and listeners. Instead, Republicans are watching the catastrophic situation unfold in Texas and still plow ahead with plans to essentially defund these local emergency alert systems anyway. Cutting off this funding is going to be a death sentence for one of the most reliable sources of news and information that our people rely on. And rural areas that aren't served by big corporate media companies are going to be hit the hardest. Defunding public broadcasting is going to take news even farther away from local communities. And I know the people of my state don't want to be dealt with by somebody from a town on the eastern seaboard in a high-rise. I'm going to close with this. Everything Republicans have done since gaining their trifecta of power has been with the goal of helping corporations consolidate power and profits on the back of everybody else. And for me, this is a regular reality, Mr. President, because I see it as the ranking Democrat on the Finance Committee, which has jurisdiction over taxes and trade and business and health care. This bill is no different from what we have seen over the last few weeks in terms of corporations consolidating power and benefiting from legislation. If it passes, this bill is going to take a wrecking ball to the services that Americans across this country rely on. It's going to make communities less safe, just so Republicans can brag about another partisan ideological trophy. So that's what we're dealing with here. When Donald Trump says we're going to do this, Republicans say, how high should we jump? By passing this legislation, Republicans would send a message once again that they are willing and eager to give up their congressional power to the executive branch. I so appreciate Senator Durbin bringing this issue to the floor of the Senate to open a lot of eyes on what's on the line, because I know he, and we've talked about this before, we believe in a government that gives everybody a fair shot, gives everybody a chance to get ahead. You've made that point today, that government's not just supposed to be about the mighty and the powerful and the people with money. And I thank you for this and all your wonderful service, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from Vermont is recognized.
I want to join my colleagues in supporting the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I want to talk about two things. One, the people we represent and why it's so important that we maintain this service that's so essential to their well-being. And second, I want to speak about the institution we're part of and why it is an absolute betrayal of this institution's values and procedures to try to cut this program in this way and at this time. I mean, first of all of us have public broadcasting in our communities. And one of the biggest challenges, especially in our rural communities, is all the forces that are fraying the bonds that have been so central to the quality of life in those communities. It's our community hospitals that are under such financial stress. It's the lack of manufacturing that we're trying to have come back, where there's good jobs. It's the depopulation, where we can't get folks, there's not enough folks to serve on the volunteer fire departments. These are real challenges to what I think all of us here who represent rural folks appreciate are really among the best folks that we have in this nation. You know, it's rural folks who sign up and enlist in the military in a far greater percentage than other parts of America, who pay the price of the wars in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever it may be that the commander-in-chief and Congress send them. And we have had a discussion in here that I do believe is bipartisan about the importance of strengthening rural America and how to do it. Is a topic of ongoing conversation, and it should be. But one of the institutions that has served your constituents in Ohio very well, Senator Durbin's in Illinois, Senator Wyden's in Oregon, Senator Cantwell in Washington, and me in Vermont, is public broadcasting. It's the radio and the television. One of the things that allows us to be united, despite our differences, is a shared understanding and knowledge of what is going on in our communities. That's what the news is about. It's not a propaganda machine. It's not advocating the point of view of the president or the point of view of the senator from Vermont. It's giving it information. At its most elemental level, it's giving dire information that's desperately needed when we have a natural disaster. We in Vermont had a flood on this day in 2024. We had a flood this day on 2023. And the institutions that was so essential to response, to information that was really vitally necessary, that allowed people to share the experience and figure out what to do, was Vermont Public. It's important. It is not about politics. It's about the shared experience that people in a community and have a sense of place need to help them have confidence that they can count on one another, that they know where they live, and they care about it. So the question I have for us in respect to the responsibility that you have and I have to the people we represent is, when we know that there are these extraordinary globalizing pressures, the demographic changes that are occurring in our communities that are weakening the bonds of brotherhood, why would we compromise an institution that have served so many so well for so long? It weakens that sense of community. So why would we do that? There is not a good reason that we would do that. There's not a budgetary reason why we would do that. This is $1.60. If we wipe out everything, it's about $1.60 for every taxpayer in the country. Seriously? A cup of coffee, what's that cost? A cable TV subscription, what's that cost? And at what price? That capacity to share information, to understand the experience, to appreciate the challenges that you face and your neighbors face, that is so essential to being able for people to have the strength to carry on. You know, Vermont Public started just around the time I went to Vermont, and it was in a third floor of an aging building, the Windsor Constitution House. And it was started by 5 people who knew, they just didn't know better. They thought they could start something that would last. And they had no reason to think that, other than they knew that it would be beneficial to the folks in their community. And those 5 people who started from nothing It included classical music, but news, right in the beginning, Vermont news. That has become a statewide news source that folks in Bennington up to Derby line, that folks working in the barns, milking cows, to folks on a factory floor, all have on as I visited them. And they might have Fox News on. They might have these news deserts that are afflicting all of us. What has helped us so much is that many of these extraordinarily gifted reporters who care about a sense of place, who've been on community newspapers, have now become the talent that has created this extraordinary institution of Vermont Public. Great reporting. So in a democracy, we all know we need this. And it's not because it's going to be an agent for our point of view, but it's going to be a cohesive force in the community to help people figure out the path forward. We've got to keep this. You know, in Vermont, we got pretty generous folks. The drives that we have to raise money is pretty successful. And we get about 90% of our funding through that. That's a lot higher than most states, but the 10% we'll lose, it'll cost us about $4.5 million. That's real money for us. So I just asked myself the question, when I know that the things I'm saying about our appreciation of people in rural communities is something that every single one of us, Republican and Democrat, know is true. And every single one of us, Republican and Democrat, would assert that we want to strengthen those rural communities because we have direct experience with how powerful and wonderful the people in those communities are. They don't complain. They work hard. They face adversity. They somehow toggle it together when it's always tough to pay your bills at the end of the month. And then they have this one news source that helps them so much be good neighbors to people that they disagree with on many other things. And our Vermont Public Television has also been tremendous, and it works. Vermont Public is both our what was public broadcasting and the public radio. They work together. And how many of our kids benefited from the extraordinary programming that helped kids share the values that are independent of what your political point of view is. Values like goodness, values like tolerance, values like acceptance, tolerance. That's what the program is about. It's values, shared values. And you can be the most conservative person in the world. You can be the most liberal person in the world. You have no right to be disrespectful because you are, quote, right politically. This is an institution that has served us well at very little expense. It would be heartbreaking for us in Vermont to see the United States Senate give the back of the hand to those folks who, over 50 years ago, inspired by a commitment to their neighbors throughout the state of Vermont, and tell them that we want to take away their funding. And the second point I want to make is about the institution we're part of. We passed a budget. We appropriated money for this. 53 Republicans supported it, right? That was 3 months ago. What's changed? Nothing has changed. Doge came, Trump came, they're looking for scalps. Cut funding, get rid of USAID. But we as an institution have the power of the purse. We had a negotiation. we came to a mutual decision that spending public dollars on public broadcasting was a good thing. And that was a negotiated outcome that now is being torn up. So what does it do for the budgetary process, where we have to go through a process that is extremely difficult because there are extremely different points of view about how best to spend money and where to spend it. But an institution can't survive if at the end of that process, the agreement made becomes the agreement that is broken. It erodes trust. It demeans our institution. It makes weak the bonds of trust that we must have amongst us to come to resolutions and defend them and carry them out. So, Mr. President, we must not abandon the people we represent and the right they have to public broadcasting, and we cannot abandon the trust we must have in one another to keep our word. An agreement made must be an agreement kept. I yield back.
I recognize the senator from Washington.
President, I rise to join my colleagues. I want to thank the senator from Illinois for helping to organize us today, my colleague from Oregon, my dear colleagues from the Commerce Committee, Senator Welch and Senator Baldwin. But we're here today to talk about an essential safety issue. It's really public safety, and somebody's trying to masquerade it as a fiscal responsibility issue. The proposed rescission of $1.1 billion from the Corporation of Public Broadcasting isn't just an attack on NPR and PBS. It's a reckless endangerment of 13 million Americans who depend on these stations for life-saving emergency information. When the floods rise in the Southwest, or wildfires rage in the West, or hurricanes barrel down on the Atlantic or Gulf Coast, public broadcasters are often the only lifeline connecting families in rural communities to the crucial emergency information. This isn't hyperbole. These are the facts. Consider what happened in Kentucky during the historic tornado of December 2021, when that devastating storm carved one of the longest tornado tracks in our nation's history. WKMS public radio was often the sole source of news as the community suffered widespread power and communications outages. So families huddled in the dark, relying on battery-powered radios to receive life-saving information. Without WKMS, many would have been completely shut off. Or look at Hurricane Helen just last year. 500,000 Americans lost power across the Southeast, the internet failed, cell phone towers went dark, but Blue Ridge Public Radio kept broadcasting, providing the most reliable information when alternative sources simply would not function without electricity. Even in the aftermath of the unthinkable situations that happened this past week in Texas, Texas Public Radio stayed on the air to provide updates on severe weather alerts, recovery efforts, and helping a community mourn and rebuild together. The numbers are a sobering story. 79 radio stations, 33 TV stations across 34 states will probably have to shut down if these cuts are enacted. This chart shows the impacts that people are saying we have from fire, our most vulnerable fire situations coming up. I think these are this year's numbers. That's in red. Our most vulnerable tornado. Well, the senator from Illinois knows this well. All of this in the light color in the green, very high, relatively high tornado risk. And then the last are blue coastal areas, relatively high or high risk for hurricane. And what do the black dots represent? What do the dots represent in each of these areas? Radio stations that will no longer exist if this rescission comes into power. If you cut these programs, you are going to lose the revenue from these radio stations and risk them being shut down. Now, why would we do that? For me, in this part of the central part of our state, I guarantee you, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it in Yakima, Washington, where KDNA serves the surrounding community that has high risk of wildfires. Northwest Public Broadcasting maintains a 24/7 fire coverage from May through October, tracking blazes that threaten lives and property. And they've expanded coverage especially to address wildfire communication gaps for Spanish-speaking Northwesterners. This is a big agricultural section of our state, and we want to ensure that everybody receives the alerts regardless of language. What the president's rescission ignores is that public broadcasters serve as the official resource in at least 20 states' emergency plans. The NPR manager, they manage the public radio satellite system, receive emergency alert systems that are fed directly from FEMA. So that means they're part of our emergency response. PBS operates the Warning, Alert, and Response Network, which transmitted over 11,000 emergency alerts last year alone. That's 33% increase from the previous year. Let me repeat that. 11,000 emergency alerts went out. That's 11,000 times that these radio stations in these areas I'm talking about warn people about the dangerous and life-threatening risks. In Oklahoma this March, public broadcasters issued 65 fire alerts across 13 counties in just 10 days. 6 evacuation orders were transmitted. KOSU operates this system at a cost of $751 annually, with the CBP providing the crucial support. This is similar to funding like local focused media in the Alaska Rural Communication Service, Northwest Public Broadcasting, or Harvest Media in the Great Plains. It would cost local broadcasters more than double of CPB's current contribution to replace these critical services. So this isn't smart budgeting. It is definitely penny-wise and pound foolish. These will cost lives instead of saving dollars. Rural communities face the greatest threat. We know that. We just learned this even more this past week in these horrific tragedies. When a severe storm knocks out power, when tornadoes approach, when cell phones fail, when battery power and car radios don't work, we need to make sure that there are radio stations that do. Since 1975, Congress has recognized that public broadcasting requires stability to serve communities effectively. So this isn't a partisan issue, it's a practical issue. We need to say that we are going to save public radio. When the next disaster strikes, and trust me it will, I live in a very disaster-prone part of the United States with all sorts of issues, from fires to volcanoes to tsunamis to floods to lots of things. We need to access and save potentially life-saving information. So I urge my colleagues to reject these dangerous rescissions and make the investment here that is helping us save lives across the United States. I thank the President, and I yield to my colleagues.
Mr. President,
I recognize the senator from Wisconsin.
I rise today in strong opposition to President Trump's plan to claw back funding that Congress approved on a bipartisan basis. Not only does this so-called rescissions package defund critical programs that Wisconsinites rely on, it fundamentally undermines the ability of Congress to write and pass bipartisan appropriation bills. To my colleagues who push for more bipartisanship in our work here, passing rescissions packages like this will only make that bipartisan work harder. It will mean more partisanship, more deadlock, and ultimately greater risks of government shutdowns. And that's why we have not passed a partisan rescissions bill like this package before. Like any bipartisan agreement, there are always things in annual appropriations bills that we don't like or we would write differently, and things that my Republican colleagues don't like or they would write differently. But how can one party negotiate and make concessions as a part of bipartisan annual appropriations bills if the majority party can just walk back those agreements months later? I'd like to start by calling out the harm this package will do for Wisconsinites in the short term. In particular, cuts to public broadcasting. 1 in 4 Wisconsinites live in rural communities, and many rely on public broadcasting for local news, emergency alerts, and free educational programming, especially for children. Wisconsin Public Radio is the primary broadcast relay for Wisconsin's emergency alert system, including amber alerts and life-saving weather alerts like tornado and flash flood warnings. We need to look no further than the absolutely devastating news out of Texas to see that access to high quality and timely information can be the difference between life and death. Access to local news from reporters and sources that community members trust is more important than ever. Stripping this funding would endanger local news that's already disappearing in so many Wisconsin communities. In 2024, almost 1 in 5 newspapers in Wisconsin shut down, according to a recent study. That same study found that Wisconsin's northernmost county, Bayfield County, had no local news sources, while 22 counties across Wisconsin had just 1 local news source. That's where public media plays a critical role in keeping Wisconsinites connected with their communities. Stations like WXPR in Rhinelander would be under threat if this package advances. One of the few news sources producing local reporting in Wisconsin's Northwoods and Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Or Radio Milwaukee, which because of public funding can broadcast local school board meetings for parents and families to stay in touch with what's happening in their schools. Without federal support for public media, this critical information could disappear for Wisconsin families. The president's effort to take this funding from local communities and endanger vital information that Wisconsinites need to stay safe is all because he's trying to desperately pay for his deficit bomb of a bill that just got rammed through Congress. That bill gives huge tax breaks to the wealthy and big corporations. And President Trump and Republicans are paying for some of it by gutting Medicaid and kicking families off nutrition assistance, and now taking away access to public media. But beyond the clawbacks included in this package, the second point I want to make is about what these proposed cuts mean for Congress and our ability to write bipartisan appropriation bills going forward. It is clear to me that President Trump does not respect the separation of power, and I remain hopeful that my Republican colleagues will stand with Democrats to protect the powers given to Congress by our Constitution. With this recession package, House Republicans bent their knee to the king and once again green-lighted Trump's wishes. I'm asking my Republican Senate colleagues not to follow suit because the future of bipartisan compromise depends upon it. The package that the White House proposed and the House approved claws back billions in funding that Republicans and Democrats approved on a bipartisan basis. If Republicans approve this package on a party line vote, it will fundamentally undermine Congress's ability to set funding levels. If Senate Republicans allow this bill to pass, we know that the administration will keep sending us new rescission packages. And the president has already put a target on the bipartisan investments he wants to claw back. We've seen his funding freezes, from cuts to cancer and Alzheimer's research, to withholding funding for after-school programs, to slashing workforce training programs. This White House froze funding that was approved by this very body, written and passed by both Republicans and Democrats. If my Republican colleagues approve this reversal, then what's next? What's to stop every future majority party from throwing away months of bipartisan work? What incentive will minority parties have to come to the table to get a bipartisan funding bill over the finish line if the party in power can turn around and go back on their word? I ask my Republican colleagues to consider what advancing this package will mean for the next round of negotiations that we're about to enter for fiscal year 2026. I believe the future of bipartisan compromise hangs in the balance here, and I urge you to vote no on this rescissions package. And I yield.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the following senators be permitted to speak prior to the scheduled vote. Myself for up to 5 minutes, Senator Lujan for up to 5 minutes, Senator Blunt Rochester for up to 5 minutes, Senator Markey for up to 8 minutes, and Senator Ernst for up to 5 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, I thank Senator Durbin for bringing us together, and I rise today in strong opposition to this request that Congress take away funding that it has already passed on a bipartisan basis, Democrats and Republicans working together, House and Senate. This proposal would gut already designated funding for public broadcasting and slash critical international aid funding, programs that have long had bipartisan support. As the daughter of a newspaperman, I know how important public media and the free press are to our country. Public broadcasting reaches nearly 99% of Americans, 99%, with programming they don't have to pay for, delivering educational programming for our kids, coverage of local news stories, and life-saving emergency alerts. I can't tell you how many times in some of the most remote areas of my state, that tip of Minnesota, I was just listening to the public radio station up there. They will inform you of what's happening with wildfires in Canada, because they wouldn't really care about that in certain parts of the country, even in certain parts of my own state. But it matters to people for emergency reasons, or flooding of roads matters to them. They don't even know if they can get from one place to another. We've had sudden incidences, even in those remote areas, that it is the source of news. Access to this programming is important to people in urban, suburban, and rural areas alike. We have long agreed on a bipartisan basis to support the more than 1,500 local and regional public TV and radio stations throughout the country. I love the map that Senator Cantwell showed us, because it showed how these stations are distributed across the nation in what we might call the reddest of states, in the most rural areas. I would argue in some of those rural areas, they are the most important. And yes, they are trying to undo this critical funding, but not all of them. I understand that people are working together on this, and I think we must continue this support. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting supports public TV stations in my state, in places like Duluth and Granite Falls and Austin, and supports 16 public radio stations across our state, like the ones in Grand Rapids, in Bemidji, and in Brainerd. We have a long history of producing public programming that is quite outstanding in our state, from Prairie Home Companion, which many have heard of, to Marketplace. Came out of local stations out of Minnesota. Public media in Minnesota has also created amazing original TV series like the ones to inspire more young people to enter STEM fields and spotlighting our artists and our local chefs. And we can't forget the impact on kids. When kids are exposed to so much bad stuff on the internet, PBS Kids, 15 million monthly viewers. They don't have those kinds of bad ads that pop up that they see or the bad links that they see. They see things that are suitable for kids, and parents know it. All across the country in times of crisis, public radio is essential to public safety. The Florida Public Radio Emergency Network provides geo-targeted information with live forecasts, evacuation routes, and shelter details. Alabama Public TV serves as the emergency alert station hub for the state, broadcasting signals to all radio and TV broadcasters throughout the state, as well as the primary outlet for Amber Alerts for missing kids. Twin Cities PBS launched the nation's first 24/7 TV channel broadcasting real-time emergency alerts. And recently, in the wake of the horrific shooting of the state lawmakers in the state, when portions of our state were in shelter in place, when a madman was out loose, Minnesota Public Radio kept people informed around the clock about how to stay safe, about where the shelter-in-place areas were, and what was happening with the manhunt. It's NPR that continues to report on State Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette, who I got to talk with yesterday, about their recovery, even when the national attention has moved on. That's what local public TV and local radio do for us. This request, of course, would also deepen the damage when it comes to foreign aid. The president would impose major cuts to PEPFAR, the program that began under President George W. Bush, supported by so many Republicans in this chamber, to prevent the spread of HIV/AIDS. This has bipartisan support. It's credited with saving over 25 million lives. The rescission would also weaken our other global health efforts, whether it's Ebola or malaria or bird flu. We know so many of these start in different places, and we can't just bury our heads in the sand. We actually need to take them on where they are, because you just can't hope that no one's going to come knocking at your door, because it does. And it comes in the form of a very dangerous disease, or your constituents that are stranded over in another place, or the need to help other countries so you increase your own national security. We know that very much in Minnesota with our Somalian population and what they have faced in Somalia. We know that when it comes to other countries that actually come up through all of it and are some of our best trading partners. The president's proposed cuts to funding for UNICEF are also misguided. We should be at the forefront of supporting bright futures for kids. This is about leadership. It's about national security. It's about building trading partners that are so important for us in the Midwest with our farmers. It's about the USAID Food for Peace program. Minnesota farmers and ag businesses sold a total of $70 million to that program in 2024 alone. When America shares its bounty with the world, and we do it in a smart and targeted way, we benefit. Mr. President, hacking away at public broadcasting, public radio, it's not just short-sighted, it's dangerous, and the same for the foreign aid. These investments are a small cost compared to what we get out of them. We have made a decision, a Democratic Senate at the time, a Republican House at the time, together, on how we want to spend our funding. This is on us to stand up for, yes, the separation of powers, but for standing up for the people in our community. And I hope we can do it on a bipartisan basis. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from New Mexico.
I wanted to thank my friend from Illinois, Senator Durbin, for his leadership and commitment to saving public broadcasting and educational programming for Americans all across our beautiful country. Now, unfortunately, just yesterday in New Mexico, the Rio Ruidoso rose to nearly 20 feet in a matter of minutes amid heavy rainfall, sweeping away homes, debris, and people. Now, the flooding claimed the lives of 3 people already, including 2 children. Rescue missions are currently underway. The same area was also ravaged by a wildfire just last year. Now, our first responders are working around the clock to protect their neighbors and ensure help arrives when every second counts. Now, if it weren't for the strict rules in the United States Senate on the floor, I would be playing audio right now. Audio from the mayor of Ruidoso, Mayor Crawford, who was speaking to his constituents on KRUI, the mountain radio program. Now, Mayor Crawford told his residents, quote, "We did have over 30 swiftwater rescues, have some folks taken to the hospital. We've been up and down trails looking at the homes that have been torn up there. These people have been in these homes for 70+ years. We're issuing alerts and warnings to get to higher ground." These are the alerts that communities in Ruidoso and other parts of the country need when disaster strikes. They save lives. Many of us in this chamber have witnessed the devastation caused by natural disasters in our own states, our own communities. Now, tonight I'm praying for all those families across Texas, for a safe return of those that are missing, and for those who lost loved ones. New Mexico is far too familiar with devastation and destruction that comes from fires and flooding and other natural disasters. 3 years ago, we experienced one of the worst fires in our state's history with the Hermit's Peak and Calf Canyon fire. A critical part of that response was our local radio stations and public broadcasters disseminating information in real time about evacuations, shelter information, food drives, and state and federal resources. As a matter of fact, at a time when mobile phones weren't working, most communications were down, it was only these local radio stations who were also benefiting from the transmitters from public broadcasting that they were able to communicate with so many constituents. Now, these communications are now under attack by congressional Republicans and the White House. Senate Democrats are sounding the alarm and leading the charge to stop this dangerous rescission package before it harms families, communities, and the public broadcasting that they all rely on. From the moment we wake up to the time we turn in at night, New Mexicans rely on radio and public broadcasting to stay safe during natural disasters and to connect with trusted news, educational programming, and our favorite New Mexico musicians, sometimes even a basketball game or two. Now, over the past several weeks, I received texts, calls, and people coming to my office pleading with us in the United States Senate to save public radio and public broadcasting. New Mexicans who work at radio stations are calling in to say that they're worried about losing their jobs. From every corner of our state, New Mexicans are speaking out with one clear message: do not mess with public broadcasting. Radio is one of the most dependable ways to get information out when disaster strikes a community. I've witnessed this firsthand. That is why the federal government must do everything it can to support families in crisis and ensure that they have the resources and information they need to stay safe. Stripping $1.1 billion from public broadcasting puts millions of lives at risk, including first responders and families who depend on emergency radio systems and public broadcasts to stay informed and stay safe. Now, I heard from a broadcaster in New Mexico this week who said, we are literally saving lives and finding more ways to save more. Please do everything you can to stop this rescission. Now, the White House and congressional Republicans, they're making decisions that will leave New Mexicans in the dark. A teacher in Albuquerque shared with me that she relies on public broadcasting in her classroom every day. Parents have shared that they use public media to teach their children about New Mexican culture, history, tradition, These stations are central to community life. They provide unbiased news, local reporting, and educational programming that connects people to each other and to the world. Yet Republicans are trying to eliminate public broadcasting and strip communities of trusted information. If this Republican rescission package goes through, it will only divide us further. Fewer voices, fewer facts, fewer connections. Americans are pleading not to be left in the dark. I urge my colleagues to listen to them and to vote against this reckless cut to public broadcasting. Thank you. I yield.
I always forget her.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Delaware.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you also to Senator Durbin for creating this opportunity to speak up against this rescission package. When I ran for the Senate, I never thought that I would have to stand up to defend Mr. Rogers, Sesame Street, and Curious George. But here we are. And it's hard to believe that about 56 years ago, Fred Rogers himself actually came to the Senate to advocate for PBS funding. And in his closing, he shared a song that he wrote to help teach children how to deal with their feelings of anger. The lyrics asked, "What do you do with the mad that you feel?" I find his words really poignant at this moment of incredible strife in our country, because Mr. Rogers reminds us that we all have ownership over our actions. In his words, it's hard, it's great to be able to stop when you've planned a thing that's wrong. And respectfully to my colleagues across the aisle, this is wrong, and the American people need you to stop. Stop prioritizing big corporations over the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. The strange thing is, this is actually a corporation that the Trump administration is refusing to protect. And it's the one American families rely on for news, for education, and for public safety and weather alerts. This harmful package, which had bipartisan support, funding that was approved by Congress, would cut $1.1 billion from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which could force local TV and radio stations to close. It would gut funding for programming like PBS NewsHour, a trusted news and public affairs show. It would cut funding for PBS Kids, a trusted and safe source of children's programming. And speaking of trust, while only 33% of Congress is trusted, 66% of Americans trust PBS. And who will be most hurt by these cuts? Families in low-income and rural areas. Why? Because not everyone can stream Netflix or watch Miss Rachel on YouTube. In Delaware and across our country, there are thousands and thousands of families who still don't have access to the internet in their homes, which means PBS is the best, most stable source of information for those households. And this package could cut them off. These are programs with generational impact, from Sesame Street, which has been teaching young children, like my granddaughter, to count and spell since 1969, to The Gilded Age, a show I love that gives a dramatic glimpse into the history of our country. PBS, to me, is like a living library, granting access to art, food, culture, travel, and history across our nation and the world. But it's not just educational, and it's not just cultural, it's life-saving. PBS covers 97% of American households, ensuring life-saving alerts reach communities when other systems fail. They support our country's emergency alert system, including earthquake early warnings, amber alerts, and warnings when severe weather is imminent. This is a vital service, and cutting funding for these programs would be devastating. My colleagues As we embark on the 250th anniversary of our country, our goal should be expanding participation in this great American experiment through education, information, and knowledge. These form the foundation of an informed citizenry, and informed communities create a stronger democracy. As I close, in the words of Randy Farmer, the chairman of Delaware Public Media, my home state's NPR affiliate, he said, "Independent journalism is the lifeline we depend on for a free and informed democracy." The Corporation for Public Broadcasting provides access to independent, nonpartisan journalism. To me, it is the epitome of public service. So, to bring it back to where I started, Mr. Rogers, I urge my colleagues to stop what they have planned because it is wrong. I yield back.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today to speak not just in opposition to the proposed rescission of public broadcasting funds, but in strong support of something far more important: the survival of local public radio and television stations across the country. These local stations are lifelines, and in moments of crisis, they become critical tools for public safety. When hurricanes knock out power, when wildfires force evacuations, when floods or winter storms threaten entire towns, it's local public stations that deliver the emergency information people need in real time. Public broadcasters also serve a critical role in distributing alerts to other commercial stations, serving as an entry point for the information that helps to connect the entire emergency alert system. Public media stations are embedded in their communities, trusted by their neighbors, and committed to getting life-saving information out. Pulling the rug out from under these stations, especially in rural areas where they may be the only source of local news and alerts, is a threat to public safety. That's not hypothetical. That's reality. And these stations don't just serve in times of disaster, they serve every day by delivering local news that no one else is covering. In an era of media consolidation and nationalization, public radio and television step in. They're the ones at the town hall meeting, the school board meeting, the high school debate tournaments. They're covering water quality reports, zoning changes, and the voices of everyday Americans. These stories aren't trending on social media, but they matter deeply to the people who live in these communities. And then there's the service these stations provide to our youngest viewers and listeners. For millions of families, especially in low-income and rural areas, local public television is the only source of high-quality educational programming for kids, and it's free. There are no ads, just storytelling that teaches kindness and curiosity and literacy and respect. And these stations are community institutions run by local staff and listened to and watched by local residents. In fact, let's be honest, from 7 in the morning to 5 every afternoon, it's the Children's Television Network. And that's why the polling says that 80% of Black and white and Latino and Asian families support that children's television. It's the Children's Television Network from 7 in the morning until 5 o'clock every single day that has been serving America for generations. And when we talk about eliminating funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, we're talking about cuts that are going to imperil the survival of many public stations in rural and underserved areas, which often rely on the Corporation for Public Broadcasting for more than half of their budgets. We should be finding ways to strengthen these stations, not eliminate the modest federal support that keeps their doors open and their transmitters running. And I urge my colleagues to protect local public broadcasting, protect the signal that reaches the farmhouse, the mountaintop, the tribal land, the city block, protect the station that covers your community when no one else does. And I thank each of you for your consideration on that issue. And on the second subject, Mr. President, as ranking member of the Senate Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee, I rise today to oppose the nomination of William Briggs to be Deputy Administrator of the Small Business Administration. On April 2nd, the committee reported out the Briggs nomination by a vote of 10-9. Not one Democrat voted in support. So why, you're asking? Why? Well, because the Trump administration is causing chaos and cuts and confusion at SBA. Its leadership has failed to be open and transparent with Congress about their activities, despite promises from Administrator Loeffler that she would be responsive to all members of the committee. But because of this administration's utter contempt for accountability and their shameless lack of transparency, this SBA has failed to provide us with the information necessary to hold them accountable and ensure small businesses are being supported. We still do not know if SBA has sufficient staff on hand to carry out its core programs, including disaster assistance and access to capital. But that hasn't stopped them from proposing to cut the agency by 33%. We still don't know what grants and contracts have been terminated because of President Trump's executive order eliminating programs that promote diversity and equity and inclusion. We still don't know the extent to which DOGE staffers gained access to confidential small business data at SBA. We still do not know which SBA regional and district offices will be relocated or remain open to serve small business owners, including our Springfield district office in Massachusetts. And we still do not know the justification for eliminating congressionally authorized programs aimed at helping women and veterans and small business owners. The SBA and Administrator Loeffler have been unable to provide sufficient answers to any of these questions or requests. And those questions are important because Congress must know whether our small businesses are getting the support they need and deserve. This is the only way to know whether the program is working before it's too late. Unfortunately, I don't expect Mr. Briggs to stand up to this administration and put small businesses first. In written responses to committee Democrats, Mr. Briggs was very evasive. He consistently deferred to the classic Trump talking points. I am not an SBA employee. I will follow the law. Well, we all know that this administration does anything but follow the law. So let us be clear. If Mr. Briggs is unwilling to be forthcoming with Democrats on the Small Business Committee during the confirmation hearing process, how can we bet that he will be unwilling to be transparent? And how can we not bet that he's going to become unwilling to stand up for small businesses once he has that job? So as a result, I urge my colleagues to vote no on this nomination and to demand that the Trump administration provide Congress with the information we need to hold them accountable and ensure that they are serving our 34 million small business owners. I can promise the American people that as the ranking member of the Small Business Committee and the members of the committee, we will continue to stand and ask questions that are not being answered by this SBA. With that, Mr. President, I urge a no vote on the nomination that is pending before this body.
I recognize the senator from Iowa.
Today, the Senate will vote to advance the nomination of Mr. William Briggs to be the Deputy Administrator of the Small Business Administration. I strongly urge my colleagues to vote yes in support of his nomination. As chair of the Small Business Committee, I have had the honor of getting to know Mr. Briggs and have seen firsthand what he is bringing to the table. He is sharp, he is steady, and he is the right person for the job. Throughout the committee's rigorous nomination process, Mr. Briggs showed up prepared, he was respectful, and ready to engage. The professionalism and seriousness with which he approached the committee made it clear that he would be ready to lead on day one. In fact, Mr. Briggs is no stranger to the responsibilities of SBA leadership,
having previously served as the acting administrator of the Office of Capital Access. During his nomination hearing, he emphasized how his previous work rolling out the Paycheck Protection Program equipped him with practical knowledge and the necessary experience to effectively root out fraud and waste throughout the SBA. As we continue to uncover and pursue fraud, it is critical that we have a deputy administrator who can identify and evade those pitfalls while simultaneously ensuring the agency's day-to-day operations are running smoothly. Mr. Briggs has also committed to working hand in hand with SBA's field offices to ensure that small businesses from any community, instead of just certain demographics, can access the support that they deserve. This position isn't just professional for Mr. Briggs, but it's also personal. As a former entrepreneur who ran 2 small businesses, he knows what it's like to balance the books, tackle red tape, and manage employees. He also understands the pressures and uncertainty that so many small business owners face every single day. The 1-2 punch of his government experience and private sector entrepreneurship makes Mr. Briggs the perfect candidate to help Administrator Loeffler make the SBA more accountable, more efficient, more transparent, and more focused on its core mission, which is helping America's job creators succeed. Let's give Main Street America someone who will fight with them and for them. Again, I urge all of my colleagues to support Mr. Briggs' nomination for Deputy Administrator of the Small Business Administration. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the questions occur on the Kupor nomination. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst.
Aye.
Mr. Fetterman. Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Gallego. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mr. Haggerty. Ms. Hassan. Mr. Hawley. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Hickenlooper. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Husted. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Justice. Mr. Kane. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Kim. Mr. King. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Langford. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lujan. Ms. Lummis. Mr. Markey. Mr. Marshall. Mr. McConnell. Mr. McCormick. Mr. Merkley. Mrs. Moody. Mr. Moran. Mr. Marino. Mr. Mullen. Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Murphy. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Paul. Mr. Peters. Mr. Reed. Mr. Ricketts. Mr. Risch. Ms. Rosen. Mr. Rounds. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Schiff. Mr. Schmidt. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Scott of Florida. Mr. Scott of South Carolina. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Sheehy. Ms. Slotkin. Ms. Smith. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Thune. Mr. Tillis. Mr. Tuberville. Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warnock. Ms. Warren. Mr. Welch. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Blackburn, Capito, Ernst, Grassley, Justice, and Scott of South Carolina. Senators voting in the negative: Alsobrooks, Blunt Rochester, Fetterman, Hassan, Kim, Schatz, Schumer, Warner, and Wyden. Ms. Baldwin, no. Mr. Marino, aye. Mr. Hawley, aye. Mr. Lujan, no. Mr. Marshall, aye. Mr. Cornyn, aye. Mr. Barrasso, aye. Mr. Coons. Mr. Coons, no. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Crapo, aye. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, aye. Ms. Smith. Ms. Smith, no. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mrs. Hyde-Smith, aye. Mr. McConnell. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Ossoff, no. Mr. Husted. Mr. Husted, aye. Mr. Gallego. Mr. Gallego, no. Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Bozeman, aye. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Durbin, no. Mr. Cassidy. Mr. Cassidy, aye. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Klobuchar, no. Mr. Langford. Mr. Langford, aye. Mr. Ricketts, aye. Ms. Lummis, aye. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. McCormick, aye. Mr. Bennett, no. Mrs. Moody,
So that's why I was like,
aye.
he's there.
Mr. Padilla, no.
That's why I thought.
Mr. Booker, no. Ms. Cortez Masto, no. Mr. Mullen, aye. Mr. Cotton, aye. Mrs. Fisher, aye. Mr. Kelly, no. Mr. Johnson, aye. Ms. Warren, no. Ms. Hirono, Ms. Hirono, no. Mr. Sheehy, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Mr. Peters, no. Mr. Banks, aye. Mr. Budd, aye. Mr. Moran, aye. Mr. Kennedy, aye. Mr. Schmidt, aye. Ms. Slotkin, no. Mr. Wicker, aye. Ms. Rosen, no. Mr. Kane, no. Ms. Duckworth, no. Mr. Tuberville, aye. Mr. Curtis, aye. Mr. Cruz, aye. Mrs. Britt, aye. Mr. Scott of Florida, aye. Mr. Rounds, aye. Mr. Hickenlooper, no. Mr. Young, aye. Mr. Kramer, aye. Mr. Reed, no.
Whatever I can pick up.
Mrs. Shaheen, no. Mr. Haggerty, aye. Ms. Cantwell, no. Mrs. Murray, no. Mr. Risch, aye. Mr. Schiff, no. Mr. King, no. Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Sullivan, aye. Mr. Van Hollen, no. Ms. Murkowski, no. Mr. Heinrich, no. Mr. Sanders, no. Mr. Warnock, no. Mr. Welch, no. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Whitehouse, no. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Merkley, no.
Hello, hello.
On this vote, the ayes are 49, the nays are 46, the nomination is confirmed.
On this vote, the ayes are 49, the nays are 46. The nomination is confirmed. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table, and the President will be immediately notified of the Senate's actions. The question now occurs, what does it say? Nomination. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks. Ms. Baldwin. Okay. I got you. Thank you. No.
Jim, I'm good.
Kennedy. Houston. Thank you. Cotton. Cornyn. Gotcha. Yep. I got you too. Thank you. I got you. I got you. Thank you. Yep, I appreciate it.
Hey, what?
Thank you. Slotkin, Cortez, Mans. Mr. Ossoff. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bruno. Mr. Rounds. Mr. Rounds. Thank you. Schmidt. Schiff. Schiff. No. James. Durbin. Got you. Thank you. Hi. Thank you. Thank you. Yep. Thank you. Fisher. I got one of them. Yeah. Got you. Mr. Banks. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Bennett. Thank you. Gotcha. Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal. Thank you. Ms. Blunt Rochester, Mr. Booker. Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd. Ms. Cantwell. Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan. No. Thank you. I got you. Thank you. Thank you. Mrs. Lummis, Mr. Markey. Gillibrand. Thank you. Mr. Marshall. Mr. McConnell. Thank you. Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley. Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran. Mr. Marino, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young, Senators voting in the affirmative: Banks, Barrasso, Blackburn, Bozeman, Britt, Budd, Capito, Collins, Cornyn, Cotton, Kramer, Crapo, Cruz, Curtis, Daines, Ernst, Fisher, Grassley, Haggerty, Hoven, Husted, Hyde-Smith, Johnson, Justice, Kennedy, Langford, Lee, Lummis, McConnell, McCormick, Moody, Marino, Mullen, Murkowski, Ricketts, Risch, Rounds, Schmidt, Scott of Florida, Sheehy, Sullivan, Thune, Tuberville, Wicker, and Young. Senators voting in the negative: Senators voting in the negative: also Brooks, Baldwin, Bennett, Blunt Rochester, Booker, Cantwell, Coons, Cortez Masto, Duckworth, Durbin, Gillibrand, Heinrich, Hickenlooper, Hirono, Kane, Kelly, Kim, King, Lujan, Markey, Merkley, Murray, Ossoff, Peters, Reed, Rosen, Sanders, Schiff, Shaheen, Slotkin, Smith, Warner, Warnock, Warren, Welch, and Whitehouse. Mr. Wyden, no. Mr. Cassidy, aye. Mr. Van Hollen, no. Mr. Moran, aye. Mr. Gallego, no. Ms. Klobuchar, no. Mr. Marshall, aye. Mr. Padilla, no. Is Paul not going to make it? I'm sorry, what? Paul is going to make this one. He is, okay. Fetterman, no. Mr. Schumer, no. Ms. Hassan? No. Mr. Schatz, no. Mr. Paul, aye.
On this vote, the yeas 49, the nays 45, the nomination is confirmed. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table, and the President will immediately notify the Senate of the Senate's actions.
Mr. President,
The Senator from Alaska.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate resume legislative session and be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I have 12 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and the minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the appointments of the desk appear separately in the record as if made by the chair.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on Thursday, July 10th, that following the prayer and pledge, the Journal of Proceedings be approved to date, the morning hour be deemed expired, the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, morning business be closed, and the Senate proceed to executive session and resume consideration of calendar number 64, Jonathan Gould. Further, notwithstanding Rule 22, at 11 a.m., the Senate vote on the motion to invoke cloture on the Gould nomination, and following that vote, the Senate vote on the motion to invoke cloture on calendar number 261, Whitney D. Hermendorfer. Further, if cloture is invoked, the Senate vote on confirmation of the Gould nomination at 1:45 p.m., and if cloture is invoked on the Hermendorfer nomination, all post-cloture time be expired, and the Senate vote on confirmation at a time to be determined by the majority leader in consultation with the Democratic leader on Monday, July 14th. Finally, if any nominations are confirmed during Thursday or Monday's session of the Senate, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action.
Without objection.
If there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order, following the historic remarks of my Democratic colleagues, led by the senator from Rhode Island after 300 floor appearances to one subject.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
The senator from Rhode Island.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Senator Murkowski. I rise today for the 300th time with my trusty, increasingly battered time to wake up chart to try to rouse this chamber to the looming dangers caused by fossil fuel pollution. I'm not sure whether this is a triumph of persistence or an exposition of failure or a little bit of both. I will say that Speaker Pelosi, who I admire immensely, has called out my persistent and relentless work on climate, but on the other hand, it's hard, given our peril, not to feel a bitter sense of failure about where we are. The arc of these speeches has gone from climate science and warnings through effects in oceans and specific localities, particularly red state localities, to the political obstruction that went toxic in 2010, and then from that political obstruction through to the climate denial apparatus behind it, and behind that to the dark money and the creepy billionaires who have been driving the obstruction, and then exploration into the essentially covert op of climate denial and dark money and Supreme Court capture. And the result is that we've been through some eras along the way. Era one would be the science era, which lasted for quite a long time. And by the way, God bless the scientists, they got it right. Even the Exxon scientists got it right. And then that era ended and the era of climate politics began, and that is what has been the bitter failure. We have badly let down our people with the failure in Congress to do anything significant about climate. And as the result of that failure, we've now entered the era of consequences, when the stuff that was so predicted is now starting to actually happen in people's lives. So I want to focus today on how and why we are where we are in this era of well-predicted consequences and political failure, and that takes us to this covert op that I briefly described. It is entirely possible that history will show that the three most consequential disasters for America in our lifetimes were the capture of the Supreme Court by right-wing billionaires, the influx into our elections of floods of corrupting special interest dark money, and the success of the fossil fuel climate denial operation at blockading solutions to the fossil fuel emissions crisis. It is entirely possible that fossil fuel interests were the driving force behind all three disasters. Indeed, it is likely. What makes these disasters the three worst is that their damage will be lasting and perhaps even irrecoverable. And our common failure in all three disasters as Democrats was showing up too late. Each of these disasters was a victory for the insidious political forces behind the court's capture, behind the corrupting dark money operation, and behind the climate denial fraud. Remember, those disasters didn't happen. They were done. And much of the work done by those insidious political forces was covert and clandestine. But there were plenty of signals of what was going on to anyone paying attention. If you paid attention to the court capture scheme and the dark money operation and the climate fraud, you'd quickly notice the overlap of the shadowy political forces behind all three. You'd notice the common thread: fossil fuel. Think of all three special interest campaigns as a single covert operation, a covert op run against America by forces within our country, an enemy within of creepy billionaires, fossil fuel interests, and far-right foundations, determined to impose on the country a blighted and unpopular vision that they could never achieve democratically. Up against a covert power-seizing plan like that, you need to move fast. You need to engage early. If you wait too long, you'll show up too late. Why did we always show up too late? It wasn't because these disasters were minor matters. A captured Supreme Court puts an entire branch of government under hidden political control, with no electoral remedy to its bad decisions, thanks to lifetime appointments of the captured justices. Capture of our Supreme Court has caused lasting damage already, deforming our constitutional order. The same interest, always winning, is observable, as is the statistical improbability of that, and it degrades faith in the court. Capture rots the court from within. A billionaire gifts program to reward the most amenable justices with lifestyles of the rich and famous twisted the court into knots as it tried to prevent facts from coming out, even potential tax cheating, and to defeat any real ethics code. That is all a devilish and rotten business in a great republic. As to dark money, well, dark money influence has corrupted Congress. And dark money political spending denies citizens, American citizens, the basic information they need to do their constitutional job of policing the public square. Knowing who's out, doing what, to whom, is essential. Well, the donors and the candidates and the party leadership, they all know the players in the game. Donors don't spend billions without making sure the politicians know. It's America's citizenry that is left in ignorance. What citizens do see and feel is that they're not being listened to. They don't matter so much anymore, not when tens of millions of dollars of secret funds can be dumped into an election by a billionaire. Politicians are drawn to the money inevitably. Remember the famous saying, money is the mother's milk of politics. Climate denial fraud may be the worst of the three. Climate denial fraud success may have cost us our children's futures. The looming physical catastrophes made inevitable by fossil fuel pollution damaging Earth's natural systems, they're first prefigured economically in insurance markets, and it's happening. Insurance markets are seeing what is coming. Unlike fossil fuel, the insurance industry can't lie about our future. Insurers are under a fiduciary obligation reinforced by trillions of dollars in bets to predict future risk honestly and well. And they are telling us that an economic storm is coming, driven by climate upheaval. The leading edge of that economic storm is already upon us in homeowners' property insurance markets melting down in Florida and other coastal and wildfire risk areas. We're heading into that storm unprepared while being lied to at industrial scale. 3 terrible things were done. Much of the scheme was covert, but there was plenty to see. So what went wrong? I'd say that my party fell into a rut. We too often allowed pollsters to determine our priorities. There are uses for pollsters in politics, but pollsters should not set priorities. Politicians worth their salt should set their own priorities, using their own judgment based on their own interactions with their own constituents and their own powers of foresight and anticipation. Those capacities are important in politics. Depending on polls can make those capacities flabby and weak. Polling also depends on getting the questions right. When pollsters aren't asking the right questions, it leaves massive blind spots. I have seen polling presentations supposedly telling us what we should care about that didn't even ask about climate change pollution or dark money corruption. Plus, polling is inherently backward-looking, at least back to the time the survey was taken, obviously, but truly well before that, into the lived experience of the poll's audience from previous months and years that informed their answers to the poll. So polling is reverse Gretzky. It tells you where the puck was. How often have we been told in the Senate that issue isn't very high up in importance to voters? What a dumb and irresponsible way to think. That way of thinking suffers from a huge readiness problem. By the time a captured Supreme Court reveals its bad effects in voters' lives, it's too late. The court is captured. By the time dark money influence invades elections, it's too late. Dark money, the sin that makes possible all the sins dark money pays for, is devilishly hard to root out. And climate change is physics. Once that fossil fuel pollution unleashes natural forces that will destroy our climate safety, they are not always possible to call off. It's too late. The lesson here, if you wait to fight until the polls tell you an issue is important, the battle can be over before you show up. Republicans' big donors want lower taxes for the rich, freedom for polluters to pollute for free, less safety regulation of business. None of those results is politically popular. So Republicans use polling as a tool to manipulate and move public opinion. The purpose is dynamic. Democrats think of polls like goalposts. Show me where the goalposts are and I'll kick my policy football through those goalposts. Static. Being static fails us. When danger looms, it's irresponsible to wait until everybody sees the danger to give warning. If it was your house on fire, would you wait around for your family to wake up and ask for your help? Of course not. And when you're up against strategy, particularly covert strategy, you have to fight strategy with strategy. You have to prepare, not wait around. And third, if you're always meeting voters where they already are or were, they'll begin to notice over time that you never have anything new to say, that they never learn anything from you, that you're not a leader but a follower of polls. That sense of political listlessness quietly sinks in and informs the political refrain, Republicans are shameless, Democrats are spineless. Look now at the climate mess we are in. We are sailing toward economic catastrophe, kicked off by collapsing insurance markets, followed by physical catastrophe as Earth's natural systems collapse. The fossil fuel polluters who caused this mess aren't penalized. They float instead on an economic subsidy in the U.S. of $700 billion per year. That subsidy comes from getting to pollute for free, a violation of basic economic market principles. That $700 billion annual subsidy roughly reflects the annual damage fossil fuels cause. A $700 billion negative externality, as economists would say, that should be baked into the price of the product. But Republicans in Congress desperately protect that $700 billion subsidy for their fossil fuel donors. Think of how that subsidy motivates the fossil fuel industry in politics. To protect a $700 billion annual subsidy, would you spend, say, $7 billion a year in politics defending the pollute for free subsidy? $7 billion a year to defend $700 billion a year? At that rate, fossil fuels' political operation is likely the most profitable facet of the entire industry. So they have an immense, well-funded, covert, purposeful operation. And we wait until the posters tell us the public is alert to it before we do battle? Ridiculous. How do we recover? How do we recover from all the years we skated to where the puck was and ignored the massive fossil fuel covert op because the public hadn't seen it yet? Well, first, we had better get on it. We've let a lot of sand run through the hourglass as we dawdled, and we lost a lot of credibility from missing those fights. On climate, we have to face facts. The facts are grim and the stakes are high. The corporate consulting firm Deloitte has estimated a $220 trillion difference in global GDP by 2070. Depending on whether we succeed on climate, thereby generating $40 trillion of global economic growth, or continue failing and take a global $180 trillion economic hit. The spread is $220 trillion, and Deloitte's not the lone voice. The Potsdam Institute has warned of a $38 trillion annual hit to global GDP by mid-century. Predictions of multi-trillion-dollar hits abound. And the International Financial Stability Board just warned the global banking sector to buckle up. The warnings focus on insurance, mortgage, and real estate markets. The Economist magazine has reported a looming $25 trillion hit just to the global real estate sector. Fed Chair Powell testified earlier this year before the Senate Banking Committee that climate change will make insurance and therefore mortgages unavailable in entire regions of the United States. Voices at Allianz and Aon have warned that climate change threatened to upend their entire industry. The former chief economist of Freddie Mac told the Budget Committee last Congress how insurance becomes unavailable, making mortgages unavailable, driving down the value of your home. Similarly, when insurance premiums, if you can get insurance, but if the premiums double or triple, then property values fall as the carrying costs of your home dramatically increase. Average insurance cost in Florida, $14,000 a year, predicted to double, triple, or quadruple. What does that do to the home price? Together, the chief economist said, the crisis in insurance availability and affordability can cascade into a 2008-style economic meltdown that clobbers the entire economy. Many of these warnings use the word systemic, boring-sounding word, but perhaps the most dangerous word in the economic lexicon. It means the whole system gets hit, not just the particular sector, like 2008, or worse, 1929. Everyone suffers as the economy implodes. The way out from this danger is clear and simple. It can't continue to be free to pollute. There must be a global price or penalty on carbon emissions. Nothing else works, not after the time we've wasted. We have squandered every other option. Polluter pays is not just the right thing to do morally and economically and environmentally, it's our last lifeboat. And it's a lifeboat the fossil fuel industry is trying to sink, even after pretending for years that that was the solution they wanted. Big surprise, they lied. Hydrocarbons and lies are their twin products. Our best prospect on carbon pollution right now is the European Union's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, called the CBAM. It's a tariff on the emissions associated with carbon-intensive goods like steel and aluminum that are imported into the EU. Our scenario for success, if we still have one, is that the EU sticks to its guns and doesn't chicken out. The UK honors its commitment to join the CBAM. The two economies, by the way, just coordinated carbon prices, a key step. And Australia and Canada and Mexico and other economies follow suit. There's actually even a sliver of Senate Republican interest in a U.S. carbon border tariff. A price on carbon pollution in international trade at last moves things. It begins to offset fossil fuels' global multi-trillion-dollar free-to-pollute subsidy. It aligns market incentives properly, and it creates a revenue proposition for pollution reduction and carbon capture technologies, boosting an innovation pathway to climate safety that presently does not exist. Dark money corruption got us into this pickle, and the way out there is also clear and simple. Pass the damn Disclose Act. Require that donors over 10 grand into a political race show the public who they are. No more front groups and shell corporations. The dark money battle is a race against time. To stop the dark money influence operation before it gets its claws so deep into all three branches of government that the whole system is too corrupted to care how badly voters want transparency. When that disclosure bill passes into law, the public will feel immediate relief. People will notice the political class beginning to turn its attention back to voters rather than to the billionaire donors and the corporate polluter elite running the foul dark money operation. In political ads, the tsunami of slime will diminish as real entities would have to own political messages. Many players behind the tsunami of slime will actually back off because once voters understand who's behind a message, sometimes they get the joke and you can't go forward any longer. And even if they don't back off, at least someone can be accountable for the slime and lies that permeate our politics. Less special interest money, less slime and lies, less secrecy, voters heard again. You might call it morning in America. Fix dark money and you break the grip of fossil fuel. Look at what fossil fuel dark money gets the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress to do for them every day. Right out of the gate, day one of his regime, Trump issued an executive order that took wind and solar power out of the definition of energy. Forget the politics, that doesn't even comport with the dictionary. Trump's Interior Department set out to kill offshore wind, halting the permitting process, even attempting to stop projects under construction. Trump's Energy Department choked off loans and funding for the development and deployment of low-carbon technologies and proposed slashing research budgets at our national labs. Trump's Environmental Protection Agency, now better called Polluter Protection Agency, illegally terminated billions for clean energy projects around the country. It set up California's Clean Air Act vehicle emission standards to be killed by the Congressional Review Act, a gambit first floated by fossil fuel industry lawyers in an op-ed in the polluter-run Wall Street Journal editorial page. And to pull this off, my Republican colleagues even went nuclear, overruled the Senate parliamentarian. The Trump EPA announced it will repeal rules limiting air pollution from power plants and vehicles, reverse the 2009 finding that greenhouse gas emissions endanger humans, suspend the collection of emissions data, they don't even want the data, and eliminate the social cost of carbon, the rule that quantifies that $700 billion in fossil fuel emissions harm. In Congress, because bad things happened here as well, here's my favorite. Republicans undid our fee on excess methane emission. You have to know that this fee only applied to emissions exceeding the industry's own industry standards. And half of those methane leaks could be eliminated at no net cost, since methane, natural gas, if not leaked, can be sold. So Republicans in Congress took the side of the industry's worst leakers to relieve them of having to pay for their mess. And just last week, Republicans passed Trump's mega bill, a many-headed hydra turning the power of government to help fossil fuel billionaires throttle their clean energy competition. This will kill thousands of jobs, cede dominance of clean energy to China, drive consumers' electric prices way higher, and turbocharge the carbon pollution that's already making insurance, groceries, and electricity more expensive. There's one simple goal behind all of this: help Republicans, fossil fuel donors, to sell more oil, natural gas, gasoline, and diesel. Every electric car that's never produced means one more internal combustion engine that will spend years consuming their gasoline. Every solar array or wind turbine that's never built will mean more of their natural gas combusted to produce electricity. It doesn't matter to the creepy billionaires that the ownership costs of an EV are already less than those of a combustion engine car, or that solar power is now the cheapest form of energy there is. All that matters is the narrow self-interest of the polluting fossil fuel industry that funds and controls the Republican Party. Every indication is that the fossil fuel industry dark money operation orchestrated the Republicans' energy agenda. Every indication is that they have burrowed into the executive branch and are running it from the inside. Russell Vogt, for instance, running OMB, has spent essentially his entire career on fossil fuels' dark money payroll. His counsel there is Mark Paoletta from that infamous painting of the court fixer Leonard Leo, billionaire donor Harlan Crow, and their pet Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas from the court capture operation. Which brings us to the captured court, the court that dark money built. Freeing the Supreme Court from its captured state will not be easy. Too many justices are willing participants in the capture scheme. If the Supreme Court justices wanted to redeem their court, they could have done it already. They could do it on their own any day. But captured is as captured does. They don't want to. It matters on climate. A rejuvenated court would take the evidence of climate harm seriously. Over and over, the court that dark money built has favored fossil fuel interests. For instance, it threw out the Clean Power Plan, saving industry tens of billions in compliance costs and allowing more than a dozen years of continued pollution. Let's say that $700 billion fossil fuel subsidy number is close to right. If the Clean Power Plan would only have shaved 10% off the harm, that one decision cost Americans nearly $1 trillion in pollution harm. That's worth capturing a court for if you're the fossil fuel industry. The court created the major questions doctrine to give the fossil fuel industry a legal weapon to stop future climate regulations. The court withdrew the Chevron doctrine, taking away from experts in the regulatory process the benefit of the doubt. In all these cases, the fossil fuel industry got free legal services from Republican attorneys general, undoubtedly grateful for their fossil fuel political funding. What a rotten misuse of that badge of office. To reform the court, Congress will have to act on two fronts. One is to require a proper ethics code for the court, including the essential elements of proper legal process, actual fact-finding, and neutral decision-making. Not complicated stuff. Rule of law is based on those two principles. The justices shield themselves from both. The present court and its political defenders pretend that fixing this is impossible, but it's not. Every state Supreme Court faces the issue of administering a proper ethics code for itself, and every single one has figured it out. Forget impossible, it's not even hard. The problem is that the justices, or certain of them, enjoy being the only 9 people in government immune from proper ethics scrutiny. Look at that billionaire gift program, and you might see why. They violate an ancient principle so ancient it's in Latin. Nemo judex in sua causa. No one should judge their own case. As an ethics scholar recently put it, it's a conflict of interest to judge one's own conflict of interest. The public is ready for more than just real ethics, however. The present court's legacy of scandals, destruction of precedent, doctrinal leaps, false fact-finding in cases, and striking patterns in what interests always win is damning. Add the unhealthy secrets around who chose justices and why, and around the billionaire's campaign of gifts to amenable justices, and around tax mischief related to those gifts, and it is a mess. The public is ready for term limits and turnover. A court rejuvenated with regular turnover, with its secrets disclosed and a proper ethics procedure going forward, is a court that can again merit the confidence of the American people and perform the judicial function honorably. So, can we win a pathway to climate safety, rid our politics of dark money, and liberate a captured court? Yes, we actually can, but it won't be easy. The successful fraud of climate denial, the insidious corruption of our politics by dark money, and the special interest capture of the court all are political prizes that will be defended to the death by the fossil fuel industry. The fossil fuel-funded infrastructure of front groups that propagates the climate lies, that launders and funnels the dark money, and that captured and now cossets and guides the justices will be fighting for its very survival. The front groups are many, but like keys on a piano, they are part of a larger instrument, a fossil fuel instrument of secret influence and corruption now operating our government from within. That instrument must be defanged to revive American popular democracy. In this battle, yes, we have disadvantages. The infrastructure built for Republicans by their fossil fuel billionaire backers is immense. They can run media operations that drown us out. They have unlimited money. They plan years in advance. They've whipped the Republican Party into exceptional battle discipline. Don't get me wrong, we have some super talent on the Democratic side, but it's ballet dancers against centurions. Ballet dancers may be better athletes than centurions, but 100 centurions against 100 ballet dancers will end predictably. We don't have much muscle memory for fighting either. The recent Democratic administrations have tended to be conflict averse. We've been less aggressive, lambs versus wolves. The wolf doesn't much fear the bite of the lamb, and they don't much fear us. Imagine Winston Churchill trying to defend Britain without radar, or Spitfires, or his war room under the streets of London. Proper defense infrastructure can be outcome determinative, and we haven't had that. We do have one big advantage. The whole crooked apparatus of the right-wing fossil fuel billionaires depends on secrecy to work its evils. We don't have to match fossil fuel front group for front group, propaganda mouthpiece for propaganda mouthpiece, lie for lie, even dollar for dollar. It doesn't have to take $7 billion on our side. Our cause can win by shining a bright light on their mischief and their motives. Americans love solving mysteries, love to hear what Paul Harvey called the end of the story. Fossil fuel has to lie and connive and hide behind masks to win. We can be truth tellers and win. People don't like being lied to. The truth, that's our superpower. Even with that superpower, it's still not going to be easy. We have to face that there's some real work ahead of us. I was a prosecutor. You've seen the TV shows. Prosecutors investigating gangs build careful diagrams of all the gang's members, showing who reports to whom and who's connected to whom and what phone numbers and addresses we have and what evidence we've got and where they get their guns and where they distribute the drugs. All of that goes up on the corkboard because you have to know your adversary. Intelligence agencies do deep research into the personnel of opposing services. Know your adversary. We don't. Until recently, few Democrats even knew who Leonard Leo was, the top operative of the billionaire's court capture scheme. Most Democrats couldn't pass a basic test of what front groups are arrayed against us. That's not the fault of individual members of Congress. We've just had no war room to organize the information, no offense coordinator to plan strategy, no batter's book to tell us who can't hit inside pitches, no corkboard to pin up the gang information. Corporations do better research on rivals when prepping a corporate takeover than we did trying to defend our country from this political takeover. The idea of a real-time anti-fraud climate cleanup operations center, calling out the lies, following the money, and spotlighting who's behind the front groups may seem beyond our reach, but it's not. The military has had op centers for years. You've seen the Hollywood versions with the TV screens up on the walls and the satellite feeds and the drone feeds coming in. The RAF, back in World War II, had a simpler one during the Battle of Britain with those little ships and plane models being pushed around with the long sticks on the big map table. Radar told the RAF War Room when to scramble the Spitfires, where to send them, and what enemy to expect when they got there. We haven't built that. No radar, no Spitfires, no War Room under London. But we can. Remember those three evils: the fossil fuel industry's climate denial fraud, the capture of the Supreme Court, that dark money infiltration of our politics. They didn't happen. They were all done, very deliberately, using an armada of front groups and carefully scripted fakery. It is best to think of it all as a single beast, a beast that is now burrowed in and is running the government for Trump. It's a takeover by a shadow government working for right-wing extremists and fossil fuel polluters. If we don't see it for what it is and call it out for what it is, how can we warn people of what's happening? And if we don't warn people of what's happening, how can we possibly believe we have done our duty in this moment of peril? Climate change makes this a battle with a ratchet. There's some things you just can't come back from. The ratchet has clicked, and there's no return. So it is urgent. It is time for us all to wake up and fight. Mr. President, I yield the floor.